In your eyes, are there certain historical parallels to this type of cycle? I mean, is it the case that the cycles in the 70s and 80s were more income driven, rather than the ones we saw in the 2000s?
Yeah, I think the most relevant cycles that come to my mind are back in the 50s and 60s. You know, there you had particularly post World War II, a generation that was coming out of, the depression was familiar to them, and they were very reticent to take on new borrowing in order to finance their spending. And so most of the expansions that occurred in the 50s and the 60s were predominantly income driven expansions, low credit, low borrowing, mostly income oriented expansions. And I think in many ways similar to, US households went through a very painful experience in the global financial crisis. And people have been very reticent to lever up as a function of that experience over the last 15 years. And so, that is very similar in that sense. Now, expansions in the 50s and the 60s, pretty much no one trading today has any direct experience other than maybe being little kids in the 50s and the 60s expansions. So that's why I think it's one of these cases where people are always look to their personal experience to develop and apply the heuristics that they've developed over the course of their careers. And those are just not as relevant today as essentially studying previous cases like those cycles.
I think the 50s and the 60s are also interesting because, as you said, it comes after the Second World War. Of course, we had the Depression before that, which was like the global financial crisis today. And then the war, you could say, was a bit like COVID in terms of, the economy was shut down, massive government spending. So you kind of had something similar to kind of a wartime shutdown of an economy reopening. So you had a kind of a COVID effect today. So there are lots of parallels that we have to that period.
Yeah, I think that's a good a parallel to draw, both the depression or deleveraging environment and then the wartime type spending. Of course, during COVID, a lot shorter time. All that was sort of compressed in a lot shorter time frames. But certainly in the core of our personal experience.